Hello? Hello? Is this emergency services? Please, you've got to help me. There's something unbelievable out here.
In the heart of the Appalachian wilderness, a group of hunters tracks a rare wolf species, unaware of the terror that awaits. Their jubilation turns to dread as they kill a wolf, only to awaken a monstrous legend. As night falls, they are stalked by a colossal, vengeful werewolf, part of an ancient, hidden lineage. Lost and hunted, they face a cunning predator in a spine-chilling game of survival. One by one they disappear, dragged into the darkness. Will any survive this nightmare, or will they become mere whispers in the forest? Prepare for a heart-pounding journey into the unknown, where every step could be your last. Welcome to the terror of the howling shadows. In the fading light of a late autumn afternoon, a rugged group of hunters trudged through the dense underbrush of the Appalachian wilderness. They were a mix of seasoned locals and out-of-town enthusiasts, brought together by a common goal: to track down a rare species of wolf rumoured to roam these parts. Among them was John, a grizzled veteran of countless hunts, his eyes sharp and movements deliberate. Beside him, Mike, a younger but equally skilled hunter, carried a high-powered rifle, his excitement barely contained. As they moved deeper into the woods, the air grew colder, and the forest seemed to close in around them. Tales of mysterious creatures and unexplained occurrences in these mountains were common in local lore. "You know," Mike said, breaking the silence, "they say this is Bigfoot territory." John chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to blend with the rustling leaves. "Bigfoot, huh? Well, we're not here for fairy tales. Keep your eyes peeled for that wolf." The group continued, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of fallen leaves. Hours passed, and the light dimmed, turning the forest into a shadowy labyrinth. As the hunters navigated the terrain, a sudden movement caught their attention. A wolf, its coat a mix of grey and brown, stepped into a clearing. It was a magnificent creature, but to the hunters, it was the target they had been seeking. Without hesitation, Mike raised his rifle, took aim, and fired. The shot echoed through the trees, startling a flock of birds into flight. The wolf collapsed, motionless. The group approached, cautiously, confirming their success. "We got it!" exclaimed Mike, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. The hunters gathered around the fallen animal, their expressions a mix of satisfaction and relief. John knelt beside the wolf, examining it. "It's just a regular wolf, but a fine specimen," he said, patting Mike on the back. As they prepared to leave, the forest seemed to come alive with strange sounds, distant howls that sent shivers down their spines. They looked at each other, unease creeping into their previously triumphant mood. "Probably just other wolves," muttered one of the hunters, trying to sound convinced. But John, his experienced eyes scanning the darkening woods, wasn't so sure. A sense of foreboding settled over him as the howls continued, echoing through the trees like a mournful lament. Unbeknownst to them, their hunt had awakened something ancient and terrifying in the heart of the Appalachian wilderness. As night fell, the hunters would soon find themselves no longer the predators, but the prey, in a deadly game of survival against a foe far beyond their wildest imaginations. Ah, my dear nocturnal scholars of the macabre, it's time for a quick scare break. As we linger in these shadowy realms, a small favour I dare to ask. If my tales of terror bring you thrills, do not let our journey end here. Hit like, subscribe, and join our dark congregation. Now shall we delve deeper into the abyss. Let's embrace the darkness once more. Let's get back to the shadows. The atmosphere among the hunters had shifted palpably. The triumphant air that had followed their successful hunt was now tinged with an uneasy tension. The howls, distant, clear, continued to pierce the twilight. "I don't like this," muttered Robert, the oldest member of the group. His voice, usually steady and commanding, now carried an edge of fear. "We need to get out of here. Fast." The others nodded in agreement, their earlier bravado fading rapidly. They began to pack up, moving with a haste that betrayed their growing anxiety. The forest, once familiar and navigable, now seemed alien and menacing. As they hurriedly retraced their steps, Mike, the youngest hunter, paused. "Wait, what's that?" His voice was barely a whisper, his finger pointing towards a dense thicket. The group froze, straining their eyes into the gloom. There, between the tangled branches, was a faint outline. Something large, much larger than any wolf, was watching them. It was still and silent, a shadow among shadows, yet its presence was unmistakable. A wave of fear swept over the hunters. They knew the wilderness. They understood the dangers it held, but this was different. This was something they couldn't explain. "Let's move," John hissed, breaking the tense silence. They quickened their pace, but as they did, a disorienting sensation overtook them. Paths that should have been familiar now seemed foreign. Landmarks they had passed earlier were nowhere to be seen. The woods had somehow changed, or perhaps it was their perception, altered by fear and the encroaching darkness. Panic began to set in as they realized they were lost. The comforting logic of the experienced hunter was replaced by a primal fear of the unknown. The howls continued, closer now, a haunting chorus that seemed to come from all directions. Then, another sighting. Sarah, the group's tracker, caught a glimpse of something in the distance. A fleeting shadow, moving with a grace and speed that was almost ghostly. It was stalking them. She was sure of it. The realization hit them like a physical blow. They were being hunted. Whatever was out there in the darkness. It was no ordinary predator. It was something else. Something far more sinister. The hunters, once confident in their mastery of the wilderness, now felt like intruders in a world where they were no longer welcome. The roles had reversed, and as the darkness deepened, so did their fear. They were no longer the hunters. They had become the hunted, in a game where the stakes were their very lives. The dense canopy of the Appalachian forest seemed to close in around the group of hunters, its oppressive darkness intensifying their growing sense of dread. They moved through the underbrush in a tight formation, each person's senses heightened to the eerie sounds of the nocturnal wilderness. Suddenly, Mike, the sharp-eyed member of the group, halted in his tracks. "Wait, where's Eric?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. The group scanned their surroundings, but there was no sign of Eric. He had been right beside them just moments ago. Tension mounted as they called out his name. Then, slicing through the silence, came a blood-curdling scream. It was distant, yet unmistakably human, filled with pain and terror. Without a second thought, the hunters abandoned some of their heavier equipment and sprinted towards the source of the scream, their hearts pounding in their chests. "Let's all stick together," John commanded, his voice a mix of fear and resolve. But as they ran, the origin of the scream seemed to shift, disorienting them further. It was as if the sound was coming from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. The forest, with its gnarled trees and dense undergrowth, played tricks on their senses, making it impossible to pinpoint the direction. Exhausted and increasingly disoriented, the hunters realized they were hopelessly lost. Their equipment, now limited, had offered little comfort against the unknown terror lurking in the darkness. With a sense of impending doom hanging over them, they huddled together, their guns loaded and ready. The forest was eerily silent for a moment, and then, from the trees, came a soft, sinister rustling. The hunters tensed, every muscle in their bodies coiled like springs. Suddenly, the body of their missing friend, Eric, was hurled from the darkness, landing with a sickening thud in front of them. His lifeless eyes stared up at the night sky, his body a testament to the brutal force that had taken him. A wave of horror swept over the group. It was clear now. They were not just being hunted. They were being toyed with. This creature, this giant werewolf, was not simply a predator. It was intelligent, cunning, and it was playing a sadistic game with them. "It's toying with us," whispered Sarah, her voice barely audible. The realization was paralyzing. They were not facing a mere animal. They were up against a creature that understood fear and how to use it as a weapon. As they stood there, frozen in terror, the howls resumed, closer than ever before. The hunters were trapped in a nightmare, far from the safety of civilization, facing an enemy that was as elusive as it was deadly. The line between hunter and hunted had been irreversibly blurred, and as the night wore on, their fight for survival had only just begun. "Let's move," Mike urged, his voice strained with urgency. "If we stay here, we're sitting ducks." The remaining hunters, their faces etched with fear and exhaustion, nodded in agreement. Despite their terror, they knew they had to rely on their skills to survive. John, taking the lead, suggested they use the stars to navigate. Their tracking skills, honed through years of experience, were now their lifeline. They moved cautiously, eyes and ears straining for any sign of the creature that hunted them. After what felt like hours, the dense trees gave way to a clearing. In the middle stood an old barn, its wood weathered and grey, a relic abandoned to the ravages of time. Relief washed over the hunters at the sight of potential shelter. "Let's take up camp here," John decided, his voice carrying a faint glimmer of hope. They entered the barn cautiously, guns at the ready. Inside, the air was thick with the musty scent of old wood and decay. The weak moonlight, filtering through the cracks, revealed a few straw beds scattered around. One of them was enormous, far larger than any human would need. A chill ran down their spines. "Wait, is this their den?" whispered Sarah, her eyes wide with fear. Before anyone could respond, a piercing scream shattered the silence. They spun around, but it was too late. Another member of their group, James, was gone, taken without a trace. Panic set in. The realization that the creature could move so silently, so swiftly, was terrifying. They were in its territory, possibly its very lair, and it was picking them off one by one. The hunters, now reduced to just John, Mike, and Sarah, knew they couldn't stay in the barn. It was no longer a shelter. It was a trap. With their hearts pounding and their bodies fueled by adrenaline, they fled into the night. As they ran, the howls followed them, a constant reminder that the giant werewolf was never far behind. The hunters, once confident and in control, were now reduced to desperate prey, running for their lives in a forest that had become a labyrinth of fear and despair. The chapter closes with the 3 remaining hunters, their faces haunted by the loss of their friends and the relentless pursuit of the creature. They knew their chances of making it out alive were dwindling, but they were determined to fight until the very end. The night was far from over, and their nightmare was only intensifying. Breathless and spent from their relentless flight, the 2 remaining hunters, John and Mike, came to a halt in a small clearing. Sarah, her face pale and eyes wide with fear, broke the eerie silence. "It's because we killed that wolf. Maybe it was its cub or something." Her voice was trembling, filled with a mixture of guilt and terror. Suddenly, She turned towards the dark, foreboding trees and screamed, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." John, though shaken, tried to maintain a semblance of control. "Get a grip, Sarah," he said sternly. "We're making it out of here." He paused, looking up at the night sky. "I've been tracking the stars. Southeast, towards the road and our truck. We should be close." With renewed, albeit fragile determination, they stumbled forward, navigating the treacherous forest terrain. Then, to their disbelief, they found themselves back where they had left their equipment earlier. "This is impossible," John muttered, his brow furrowed in confusion. A more chilling discovery awaited them. The carcass of the wolf they had killed was gone, vanished without a trace. "It's like it never happened," Mike said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Grab what we need from the pack and let's keep moving," John instructed, trying to keep his voice steady. As they hurriedly gathered their supplies, Sarah heard a noise in the trees, a low, menacing growl. Overcome with guilt and despair, she cried out, "I'm sorry," and ran towards the sound. "No, Sarah," Mike shouted, but it was too late. The darkness swallowed her before they could react. Frozen in horror, John and Mike heard Sarah's distant voice, "I'm sorry," followed by a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the forest. "Let's move," John said, his voice strained. With heavy hearts, they continued their desperate trek, guided only by the faint light of the stars. They pushed through the undergrowth, every sound, every shadow a potential threat. Their goal was clear: reach the road, find their truck, escape this nightmare. But the forest seemed endless, and the howling that had haunted them all night was now a constant reminder of the terror lurking in the shadows. As they ran, the line between reality and nightmare blurred. The once familiar wilderness had transformed into a labyrinth of fear, with each step leading them further into uncertainty. The road, their last hope, seemed an eternity away, and the night was far from over. John and Mike, their flashlights' beam barely piercing the overwhelming darkness, raced through the forest. Their breaths came in ragged gasps, the sound of their own heartbeats thundering in their ears. Behind them, the sound of heavy, hot panting grew ominously closer, a relentless reminder of the nightmare that pursued them. The suspense was almost unbearable. Every shadow a potential harbinger of death, every noise a signal of impending doom. Then, through the trees, they glimpsed salvation. Their truck, parked by the road, a beacon of hope in the unrelenting darkness. "There," Mike exclaimed, pointing towards it. John, a few steps ahead, turned to Mike with a look of relief. "We made it," he said, the words barely leaving his lips before an unimaginable horror unfolded. Without warning, John was lifted into the air from behind. Blood spurted from his mouth as he convulsed in agony. Standing behind him was a sight so terrifying it defied belief. A werewolf, easily 8 feet tall, broad and muscular, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. In a desperate act of defiance, John raised his gun and fired. The bullets seemed to have no effect on the monstrous creature. With a swift, brutal swipe, the werewolf struck John, sending his body flying towards the truck. Injured but still conscious, John crawled towards the truck, his body screaming in pain with every movement. As he reached the driver's side, a gut-wrenching realization hit him. The keys were in Mike's pocket. He turned, his eyes searching the dark forest. There, in the trees, the werewolf watched him, its gaze cold and calculating. John, his options dwindling, pulled out his phone with trembling hands. With the last of his strength, he dialed for help, his voice a mix of fear and desperation. The chapter ends with John's call for help echoing into the phone, his fate hanging in the balance. The werewolf, a shadowy figure in the darkness, continued to watch, its intentions unknown. The night had taken its toll, And now, John's survival rested on a thread of hope, as thin and fragile as the beam of his dying flashlight.
Hello? Hello? Is this emergency services? Please, you've got to help me. There's something unbelievable out here.
Sir, try to remain calm. Can you tell me your location and what's happening?
I'm at the edge of the pine woods, near the old miller's farm. There's a giant wolf, but it's not just a wolf. It's standing on two legs, like a person, but it's massive. Its eyes are glowing red, and it's looking right at me.
A wolf on two legs. Sir, are you safe? Can you find somewhere to hide?
I'm hiding behind my car, but it's seen me. Oh God, it's snarling. Its teeth are as big as my fingers. Please send someone. I don't think it's going to leave. I'm really scared.
Our help is on the way, sir. Stay on the line with me. Keep yourself hidden and don't make any sudden movements. We're going to get you out of there.
Please hurry. I don't know how much longer I can stay hidden. It's like nothing I've ever seen before. A monster!
As John clung to his phone, the operator's voice, a distant lifeline in the encroaching darkness, he noticed something that chilled him to the core. Not just the huge werewolf, but other pairs of glowing eyes, all staring at him from the tree line. He could make out at least 4 or 5 more wolves, their silhouettes barely visible in the dim light. Then, a terrifying sound shattered the night's silence. The sound of the large werewolf charging towards the car. It was deafening, like a large horse thundering across the ground. The creature hit the truck with such force that it pushed the vehicle into the road. In an instant, the werewolf grabbed John by the leg, lifting him upside down. John's world turned into a dizzying whirl of fear and despair as he was carried toward the tree line. He screamed, a gut-wrenching cry of terror. No! He knew, in that horrifying moment, that he was about to become a quick meal for the monstrous pack. Time passed, and the forest reclaimed its eerie calm. When the police arrived, the scene that greeted them was one of chaos and unexplained horror. The truck was pushed into the road, its doors ajar, and a trail of blood led ominously into the trees. "Anyone there?" an officer called out, his voice tinged with unease. But there was no reply, just the haunting stillness of the forest. "I'm not going in there," one officer said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Me neither," replied the other, his eyes scanning the dark woods. The story ends with the officers standing by the road, the mystery of the missing hunters hanging heavy in the air. The forest remained silent, guarding its secrets, as the night enveloped everything in its dark embrace. The hunter's fate, a chilling testament to the ancient and terrifying creatures that lurked in the depths of the Appalachian wilderness, was sealed, lost to the shadows of the night. In the shadows of the modern world, where steel and glass rise high, a tale of primal fury unfolds. Welcome to Crescent Moon Estates, a haven sculpted by the hands of Thomas Langley, not just a master architect, but a secret guardian of an ancient legacy. Langley's world, a delicate balance of design and instinct, faces a ruthless threat, a corporate behemoth, with its soulless structures and insatiable greed, encroaches upon his territory, stealing clients and tarnishing the essence of his art. But beneath the serene facade of Crescent Moon Estates lies a fierce secret. Its residents, a tight-knit pack of eccentrics, share more than a love for unique architecture. They share a bond forged under the moon's ghostly glow. As the corporate shadows lengthen, threats escalate. Mysterious thugs haunt the night, targeting the pack, leaving destruction in their wake. But when the full moon ascends, retribution stirs. The beast within awakens, hungry for justice. Thomas Langley, torn between his human intellect and the wild heart of a werewolf, must orchestrate a cunning plan. In a world where the concrete jungle meets the wild, The howl of Crescent Moon Estates echoes. It's a fight for survival, for identity, and for the sanctity of their sanctuary. Will Langley and his pack triumph, or will the encroaching darkness consume all that they hold dear? Thomas Langley stood back, admiring the final touches on the latest home he had designed. Nestled in a secluded forest clearing, the house was a marvel of organic architecture, seamlessly blending with the surrounding nature. Its curved walls and large windows created a dialogue between the indoors and the natural world outside. Thomas took pride in his work, not just as an architect, but as a guardian of a unique heritage. As the new homeowners, the Morgans, walked around their new home, their faces lit up with delight. "Thomas, this is more than a house. It's a masterpiece. How do you find clients who appreciate such unique work?" Mrs. Morgan asked, her eyes scanning the intricate details of the living room. Thomas smiled, a twinkle in his eye. "I don't work to have clients. I seek clients to work. Each project is a journey, not just in architecture, but in understanding and fulfilling unique needs," he replied, his gaze lingering on the design that so perfectly encapsulated his client's personality. Driving back to town, Thomas reflected on his career. His clients were more than just patrons. They were a part of a special community, people who understood and shared a part of his secret world. As the sun dipped below the horizon, he felt a familiar stir within him, a reminder of his dual nature. Arriving home, Thomas settled into his favorite armchair with the evening newspaper. The headline on the front page caught his eye. "Carlson & Co., a new architectural future for our city." The article detailed the expansion of the large corporate architecture firm into his area, boasting of their efficient, standardized home designs and their ambition to remodel the city's landscape. Thomas read the article with a growing sense of unease. Carlson & Co.'s approach to architecture was the antithesis of everything he believed in. Their designs lacked soul, and their vision of the future was one where uniqueness was sacrificed for uniformity. He knew that this new player in town could threaten the sanctity of his work and the community he had built. The article hinted at aggressive tactics and a disregard for the existing architectural landscape, which could spell trouble for him and his clients. As Thomas set the paper aside, he looked out the window at the moon rising in the night sky. He knew that the coming days would test his resolve, not just as an architect, but as a protector of a hidden world. The battle lines were being drawn, and Thomas Langley, the architect with a secret as old as time, was ready to defend his vision and his pack. Ah, my dear nocturnal scholars of the macabre. It's time for a quick scare break. As we linger in these shadowy realms, a small favour I dare to ask. If my tales of terror bring you thrills, do not let our journey end here. Hit like, subscribe, and join our dark congregation. Now shall we delve deeper into the abyss. Let's embrace the darkness once more. Let's get back to the shadows. Thomas Langley's morning ritual was always the same. A strong cup of coffee, a light breakfast, and the day's newspaper. However, today's paper carried a sting that was unfamiliar to his routine. The front page of the business section was emblazoned with a headline that would have unsettled any other architect in his position. Carlson & Co., revolutionizing local architecture, out with the eccentric, in with the practical. As he scanned the article, Thomas's eyes narrowed. The piece was a blatant attack on his work. It read, "Langley's designs, though whimsical, fail to blend with our community's aesthetic. They stand out like sore thumbs, marring the uniform beauty of our neighborhoods. It's time for change, time for buildings that are homes, not playgrounds. Carlson & Co. is here to bring that change." Thomas let out a soft, amused chuckle. The words were meant to be a dagger, but to him they were as harmless as a blunt paper edge. He reflected on his conversation with Mrs. Morgan, the owner of his latest creation, only the day before. Her words echoed in his mind. "It must be hard to find clients who appreciate your unique style." To which he had replied with a confident smile, "I don't work to have clients. I seek clients to work." This article, this Carlson & Co., they didn't understand. His buildings weren't just structures. They were sanctuaries for those who were different, for those like him. His clientele was selective, not because of exclusivity, but because of necessity. They needed homes that catered to their unique lives, homes that understood the duality of their existence. As Thomas sipped his coffee, his gaze fell upon a photograph on his mantelpiece. It was an image of Crescent Moon Estates at twilight, the houses silhouetted against the setting sun, each unique yet harmoniously intertwined with the landscape. This was more than architecture. It was a haven for his kind, a place where the werewolf community could thrive away from prying eyes. The article, with its narrow vision and corporate agenda, meant nothing to him. His work was not for the masses. It was for the few who needed it. Thomas Langley was not in the business of appeasing customers. He had customers so he could run his business his way. With a determined sigh, he folded the newspaper and set it aside. Carlson & Co. might be moving into his territory, but they were stepping into a world they didn't understand. They could write their articles and make their claims, but they could never replicate the soul of his work. For Thomas, this was more than a business. It was a calling, a duty to his kind. As the morning light streamed through the window, casting long shadows across his living room, Thomas Langley knew that a storm was brewing, but like the steadfast structures he built, he too would stand resilient against the coming winds. Carlson & Co., emboldened by their corporate might, set out on a mission to poach one of Thomas Langley's most esteemed clients. Their target was none other than Vincent Marlowe, a well-known figure in the community and a secretive werewolf. With a portfolio in hand and promises of modern luxury, the representatives from Carlson & Co. approached Marlowe, expecting an easy conquest. However, the encounter didn't go as planned. Marlowe, with a knowing smirk, listened to their pitch before laughing outright in their faces. "You are but insects to Langley," he sneered, his voice tinged with a mix of amusement and disdain. Marlowe's rejection was not just a mere business decision, it was a declaration of loyalty to a bond forged in the depths of a shared secret. Back at the sleek headquarters of Carlson & Co., frustration brewed among the high glass walls and polished floors. The CEO, Jonathan Carlson, a man of ruthless ambition, called an emergency meetings with his team of architects. They were baffled by the unwavering loyalty of Langley's clients. Why do they reject our advanced designs for his unusual creations? One architect questioned, his confusion evident. Carlson, a master of manipulation, saw a challenge that he was eager to overcome. "If they won't come to us willingly, we'll find a way to lure them," he declared, his eyes glinting with determination. He proposed a covert strategy to undermine Langley's reputation and to uncover what made his clients so fiercely devoted to his eccentric designs. The team, though initially reluctant, was swayed by Carlson's persuasive argument. They embarked on a plan to infiltrate the close-knit circle of Langley's clientele, to unearth the secrets that bound them so tightly to the architect. Their methods would venture beyond the norms of business competition, teetering on the edge of ethical boundaries. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the city, Carlson & Co. set their plan in motion, unaware that they were delving into a world far beyond their understanding. They were not just challenging a rival architect, they were unknowingly provoking a pack united by a primal, unbreakable bond. The rivalry between Thomas Langley and Carlson & Co. escalated to a perilous peak when Carlson resorted to underhanded tactics. Under the veil of night, a group of hired goons, notorious for their willingness to cross legal and moral boundaries, were dispatched to one of Langley's active construction sites. The site, alive with the promise of another unique Langley creation by day, lay quiet and vulnerable in the dark hours. The goons, emboldened by the stillness of the night, began their rampage. They smashed windows, defaced the partially constructed walls, and laughed as they destroyed what had been carefully built over weeks. Their destruction was methodical, aiming to cause maximum damage. As they prepared to deal a final blow, tying a truck to a central support beam to bring down a significant part of the structure, an eerie howl pierced the night. They froze, a primal fear gripping them as they scanned the darkness. From the shadows emerged a figure, towering and formidable, an embodiment of fury and primal power. Half man, half wolf, it stood on two legs, its red eyes glowing with an intense mixture of hatred and hunger. The goons, facing the real-life incarnation of a nightmare, felt a terror they had never known. The beast charged, its growls reverberating through the night. In a frenzied panic, the goons scrambled to their vehicles, abandoning their mission as they fled for their lives. The beast's howl echoed behind them, a warning and a declaration of the protected ground they had dared to desecrate. Despite the destruction left in their wake, the damage to the site was reparable. Langley's designs were not just aesthetically unique, but also structurally resilient. The following day, back at Carlson & Co., the boss reprimanded the goons for their failure. He had underestimated the protective forces behind Langley's projects. The goons, still shaken, could only mumble about the beast, their words dismissed as the ramblings of cowards. This incident marked a turning point in the conflict. Carlson had intended to intimidate and weaken Langley, but instead he had awakened a formidable guardian. The line between a business rivalry and a battle for survival had been crossed, and the stakes were higher than ever. Carlson, in his hubris, had failed to realize that in targeting Langley's buildings, he had challenged a force far greater than mere architectural competition. The escalating rivalry between Thomas Langley and Carlson & Co. took a sinister turn as Carlson hired a professional team known for their ruthless efficiency. These mercenaries were tasked with a mission that crossed the line from corporate rivalry into outright malevolence. Under the cloak of night, the hired team descended upon one of Langley's most cherished projects, a home nestled in a secluded part of the city, designed for a family of lichens. The residents, bound to their human forms except during the full moon, were caught off guard. The house, a masterpiece of architectural ingenuity that blended with the natural environment, became the scene of a vicious attack. The mercenaries broke through the carefully designed defenses, wreaking havoc. They shattered windows, tore down walls, and vandalized the interior, showing no regard for the sanctity of the home. The residents, unable to transform and defend themselves, were overpowered and subjected to a brutal beating. As the chaos ensued, the mercenaries left a trail of destruction in their wake, mocking the very essence of what Langley's architecture stood for, a safe haven for those who were different. The next morning, the city woke up to another scathing article from Carlson & Co., this time exploiting the attack to their advantage. The headline screamed, "Langley's architectural fantasies breed danger. Carlson Homes guarantee safety and security." The article callously blamed Langley's outlandish designs for inciting the attack. suggesting that such tragedies were impossible in the standardized, secure homes offered by Carlson and Commodore. The piece was a masterclass in manipulation, twisting the narrative to paint Langley as a creator of hazardous structures unfit for safe living. The article conveniently omitted the fact that the attack was a calculated move by Carlson, instead using the incident to further tarnish Langley's reputation. Thomas Langley read the article with a mix of anger and sorrow. The attack on his clients, the violation of their sanctuary, was a blow not just to his professional pride, but to his very soul. He realized that this battle was no longer just about architectural styles or market competition. It had become a war against the very essence of what he and his clients stood for. Thomas Langley stood amidst the remnants of last night's attack, surveying the damage with a calculated eye. His mind was already drafting plans to restore the structure to its former glory, a testament to his resilience. The morning air was crisp, filled with a tension that seemed to whisper of the impending full moon. As he measured and marked, a sleek black limousine pulled up to the site. The door opened, and out stepped Richard Carlson, the man behind the aggressive campaign against Langley's work. His goons lingered by the car, a silent threat in their presence alone. Carlson approached Langley with the arrogance of a man used to get in his way. "You know, Langley," he began, his voice dripping with condescendence, "all those articles, the attacks, they were my doing." He paused, a smug smile playing on his lips. "I would never admit it in public, but I want you to know who your superior is." Thomas turned to face him, his expression unreadable. The air between them crackled with unspoken animosity, a clash of two worlds that could never reconcile. Carlson, misreading the silence, pressed on. "Come on, Langley, just between us, tell me what you really think of me." Langley met Carlson's gaze, his eyes reflecting a depth of character that Carlson would never understand. Drawing from Ayn Rand's The Fountainhead, he replied coolly, "But I don't think of you." He turned to walk away, but under his breath he added a twist to the quote, one that spoke of his true nature and the night to come. Only as food. Carlson was left standing alone, a look of confusion and anger marring his face. He had expected fear, submission, or anger, but not indifference, not the dismissal that Langley had just shown him. As Thomas walked away, his thoughts were already shifting to the night ahead. The full moon was rising, and with it, the true power of his nature would be unleashed. He felt the ancient call of the wolf stirring within him, a reminder of the strength and freedom that defined his existence. The attack on his work, Carlson's petty attempts at intimidation, they were all meaningless in the grand scheme of things. For Langley, the full moon was a time of transformation, of embracing the wild, primal side of his being. It was a reminder that he was part of something greater, something eternal. As the moon ascended to its zenith, casting a silver glow over the city, Thomas Langley prepared to embrace his true self. Tonight, he was not just an architect defending his creations. He was a werewolf, a protector of his pack, ready to face whatever challenges came his way. Under the luminous glow of the full moon, a chorus of howls resonated through the community, a primal anthem heralding the rise of the lichen. The night air was charged with a palpable sense of anticipation and retribution. In the heart of Crescent Moon Estates, Carlson's hired goons, emboldened by their previous successes, approached another home. They expected an easy target, but the full moon had transformed the playing field. As they broke through the door, they were met with an eerie sight. 3 small children sat in the hallway, their smiles revealing unnaturally long, sharp, and white teeth. The goons, taken aback by the children's unsettling appearance, turned around to find the family they had terrorized the other night standing in the doorway, their transformation into lichens already underway. Their bodies had taken on a powerful, muscular form, covered in thick fur that shimmered under the moonlight. Their eyes glowed with a fierce golden hue, filled with the promise of vengeance. Their hands and feet had morphed into massive paws, tipped with lethal claws, and their faces had elongated into snouts bearing rows of razor-sharp teeth. The lichens wasted no time. Their revenge was swift and merciless. The screams of the intruders pierced the night, a chilling soundtrack to the swift justice delivered by the werewolf family. The community, awakened by the commotion, could only listen as the balance of power shifted under the moon's watchful eye. Meanwhile, at the main building of Carlson & Co., an ominous silence was broken by the sounds of chaos. Bodies lay strewn at the entrance, a gruesome trail of blood leading to the boardroom where Richard Carlson sat, oblivious to the carnage outside, grumbling about the disturbance. Suddenly, the door burst open, revealing a towering figure, a werewolf in its full, terrifying glory. Standing at least 7 feet tall, its matted fur was stained with blood, and its red eyes burned with a ferocious intensity. Blood dripped from its mouth and fangs, painting a picture of raw, untamed power. Carlson screamed in terror, his mind unable to process the nightmare that had unfolded before him. The werewolf loomed over him, its hot breath mingling with the stench of fear that filled the room. Then, in a guttural, primitive voice, the beast spoke, its words laced with menace. "There's no one here. Tell me what you truly think of me, and I'll tell you how you taste." The night of the full moon had become a reckoning, a moment where the natural order reclaimed its dominance. As Carlson faced the embodiment of his own undoing, the lichens of Crescent Moon Estates stood united, their howls echoing into the night, a declaration of their strength, their unity, and their indomitable spirit. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, the lichen community came together to repair the scars of the night. Thomas Langley oversaw the restoration of the building site, his eyes reflecting a night of unleashed primal justice. The serene morning air was a stark contrast to the ferocity that had unfolded under the full moon. The tranquility was soon interrupted by the arrival of police cars, their lights casting long, ominous shadows on the ground. Officers stepped out, their expressions a mix of determination and unease. They approached Langley, notebooks in hand, ready to delve into the events of the night. "Mr. Langley, we need to ask you some questions," one officer began. "There's been a situation at Carlson & Co.'s main building. It's a massacre. Body parts everywhere. Looks like a pack of wild animals got in there." Langley turned to face the officers, his expression somber. "Officers," he said, "Ayn Rand once wrote, 'Whatever may be open to disagreement, there is one act of evil that may not, the act that no man may commit against others, and no man may sanction or forgive. So long as men desire to live together, no man may initiate. Do you hear me? No man may start the use of physical force against others.'" The officers listened, a hint of confusion in their eyes as they tried to grasp the relevance of the quote. Langley continued, his voice firm yet calm. "The necessary consequence of man's right to life is his right to self-defense. In a civilized society, force may be used only in retaliation and only against those who initiate its use. All the reasons which make the initiation of physical force an evil make the retaliatory use of physical force a moral imperative." He paused, letting the words sink in. "If what you say is true about the Carlson building, then consider this. Perhaps the so-called wild animals were merely defending themselves, retaliating against an initial aggression. In the natural world, as in human society, there is a balance. When that balance is disrupted, when force is initiated, retaliation becomes not just a right, but a moral imperative. The officers exchange glances, their initial certainty wavering under Langley's steady gaze and compel an argument. Perhaps, Langley added, before jumping to conclusions about wild animals, we should consider who might have attacked first, who might have initiated the use of force. In every action, there is a reaction, a consequence that must be faced. With a polite nod, the officers took their leave, their minds troubled by the complexity of the situation. Langley watched them go, a mix of sadness and resolve in his eyes. He turned back to his community, to his pack, knowing that while the physical repairs would soon be complete, the moral implications of their actions would resonate for far longer. In the rebuilding, in the unity of his community, Langley saw not just the restoration of structures, but the reaffirmation of their right to exist, to defend, and to live as they were meant to, free, proud, and unbroken. In a shadowed town where ancient woods whisper secrets, a young real estate agent dreams of a fortune, unaware he's about to step into a nightmare. Where greed meets the supernatural. Under the full moon, the hunter becomes the hunted. Welcome to the chilling tale of the Werewolf's Woods. In the opulent heart of London, the towering office of Hargrave Real Estate buzzed with the vibrant energy of success and ambition. The glass and steel structure, a testament to modern architectural prowess, stood like a titan among the city's historic landscape, its reflective surfaces catching the golden hues of the late afternoon sun. Inside on the 15th floor, the atmosphere was electric with the buzz of a new project. In a spacious, well-lit office adorned with sleek furniture and framed accolades, Daniel Harrison, a young and confident real estate agent, lounged in his leather chair, a self-assured smile playing on his lips. With his sharp suit and meticulously styled hair, Daniel exuded the kind of charm and poise that was all too rare in the cutthroat world of real estate. "I'll have this deal in the bag before the month is out," Daniel boasted, his voice carrying a mix of arrogance and naivete. He was speaking to a group of colleagues who gathered around his desk, hanging on his every word. Despite his limited experience in land acquisitions, Daniel had landed this high-profile position thanks to his connection with Gregory Atkins, a member of the governing board and an old family friend. The Hargrave Housing Project is going to be the crown jewel of our portfolio, he continued, his eyes gleaming with the reflection of the computer screen that displayed the project's details. £1.5 billion, gentlemen. Just imagine the commissions on that. His colleagues murmured their agreement, some with genuine admiration, others with thinly veiled envy. They knew the project's success rested on acquiring a crucial piece of land, a vast tract of ancient woodland in a small, mist-shrouded town, miles away from the bustling city. The owner, some hermit named Elijah, won't know what hit him, Daniel said with a dismissive wave of his hand. A bit of charm, a dash of persuasion, and he'll be signing the land over. How can anyone say no to this much money? Little did Daniel know, the land in question was steeped in a history far more complex and ancient than any file on his desk revealed. The owner, Elijah, was a character shrouded in mystery, known in the town for his eccentricity and a peculiar disinterest in the material world. As the conversation in the office turned to plans for the evening, Daniel leaned back in his chair, his thoughts already drifting to the misty town and the easy victory he anticipated. In his mind, the deal was as good as done, the contract signed, the land his for the taking. But far away, in the heart of the ancient woodland, under the looming shadow of centuries-old trees, a different story was waiting to unfold. A story of primal forces, ancient curses, and a lineage as old as the land itself. A story where the hunter could very quickly become the hunted under the light of the full moon. Unaware of the impending storm he was about to step into, Daniel Harrison smiled, basking in the glow of his anticipated success. The sleek, black car rolled to a stop at the edge of a vast expanse of ancient woodland, where a large, weathered wooden gate stood as a silent guardian. Daniel Harrison, still exuding the confidence of a city shark in his designer suit, checked his watch with a frown. It was 12:35 p.m., 35 minutes past the agreed meeting time. These backward people can't even tell the time, he muttered under his breath, his gaze fixed on the dense trees that seemed to watch him with 1,000 unseen eyes. Suddenly, the rustling of leaves and the crunch of footsteps broke the eerie silence. Daniel straightened up as a figure emerged from the woods. The man, Elijah, looked every bit the recluse he was rumored to be, dressed in simple handmade clothes, his eyes sharp and untrusting. Daniel, ever the polished professional, opened his mouth to speak, armed with charm and rehearsed lines, but Elijah cut him off abruptly. "Let me stop you right there. I don't like you. I don't like that you made me walk through the woods from my house to meet you here. I don't like your face. Now, get on with it. I'll give you 5 minutes," he said, his voice gruff and unwelcoming. Swallowing his irritation, Daniel quickly launched into his pitch, explaining the generous government-backed offer for Elijah's land. He spoke of the housing project, the benefits to the community, and the substantial sum of money involved. Elijah listened impassively, then replied, "What need have I for money? Money is just a tool for exchange, to buy an item from someone else. I don't need anything from anyone. I grow my own vegetables, hunt in my woods for meat, and drink from my well. What need have I for money?" Undeterred, Daniel suggested that Elijah could buy nice clothes, a bigger home, or a new car, but Elijah dismissed each suggestion with a wave of his hand. "I have a house, I make my clothes, and my legs are good, but you offer me money that's not yours. Government money is money taken from hard-working souls by fear of force or prison. If I did need money, it wouldn't be dirty money. And your 5 minutes is up," he said, his tone final. Daniel, desperate to salvage the deal, tried every sales tactic and influence trick he had learned from books and seminars, but it was clear none of it had any effect on Elijah. Elijah fixed Daniel with a stern look. "Word of warning. I know people like you. I know what they want. They want power and money off the backs of others. I don't like you. If you send me a letter again, I'll use it in my fire. Do not come back. If I see you on my land, I'll consider you trespassing. And if you do decide to trespass, heed this warning. Do not walk through my woods alone. There are lots of hungry creatures in there, and a weasel like you would be easy pickings." Before Daniel could reply, Elijah turned and disappeared into the trees, vanishing as suddenly as he had appeared. Daniel stood there, momentarily stunned, the echo of Elijah's warning ringing in his ears. The realization that this deal was not going to be as easy as he thought slowly sank in, leaving a cold feeling in the pit of his stomach. As he turned back to his car, the woods seemed to close in around him, whispering secrets of the ancient land he was so eager to claim. Daniel Harrison's return to the Hargrave real estate office was met with an atmosphere starkly different from the one he had left behind. The electric buzz of ambition had been replaced by a tense silence, broken only by the sharp, impatient taps of his boss Mr. Richard Sterling, on the mahogany desk. Sterling, a man whose presence commanded attention, was known for his no-nonsense approach and cutthroat attitude. As Daniel entered the office, Sterling's eyes bore into him like steel. "Harrison, in here, now!" he barked, gesturing to the closed-door meeting room. Inside the room, the air was thick with expectation and impatience. Sterling stood, his hands clasped behind his back, gazing out of the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling city below. "Well?" he demanded, without turning, his voice laced with barely concealed frustration. Daniel, attempting to maintain his composure, began to explain the situation with Elijah. "Sir, the landowner, Elijah, he's not interested in material wealth or..." Sterling whirled around, his expression incredulous. "Not interested in wealth? Daniel, we are talking about a £1.5 billion deal here. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and you're telling me some backwoods hermit is holding us up because he doesn't like money?" Daniel, feeling the walls closing in, tried to play it smart. "Sir, perhaps if we reconsider the approach, maybe a different angle or..." But Sterling was having none of it. "No, Harrison, I don't want excuses. I want results. That land is crucial for this project. Without it, the deal falls through. Do you understand what's at stake here? Not just for the company, but for you." Daniel nodded, a sense of dread settling over him. Sterling leaned in, his gaze sharp and unyielding. "This is your moment, Harrison. You close this deal, or you don't bother coming back. If you can't seal this, consider yourself fired." Daniel's heart raced. The threat was clear and unequivocal. He had to find a way to convince Elijah to sell no matter what. The thought of losing this job, especially after the way he had obtained it, was unbearable. "Understood, sir. I'll figure something out," Daniel stammered, his mind racing. Sterling gave him a long, hard look before dismissing him with a wave of his hand. "Get out of my sight, and Harrison, don't come back without that land." As Daniel left the office, the weight of Sterling's ultimatum hung heavy on his shoulders. The task ahead seemed impossible, but failure was not an option. He needed to come up with a plan, and fast. The challenge of Elijah and his ancient woodland loomed large in his mind, a puzzle that he had to solve, or his career at Hargrave Real Estate would be over before it truly began. Daniel Harrison's sleek black car stood alone at the edge of Elijah's land, the grandeur of the city a stark contrast to the wild, untamed woods that lay beyond the gate. With a deep breath, he stepped out of the car and began to walk into the heart of the ancient woodland, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the soft earth. As he ventured deeper, the forest seemed to close in around him. Branches snagged at his expensive suit, tearing the fabric, while unseen thorns and brambles scratched and dirtied his skin. He pushed forward, convinced that confronting Elijah directly was his only chance to salvage the deal. However, the vastness of the land soon disoriented him. The trees, towering and indistinguishable, seemed to mock his city-bred confidence. Hours passed, and with each step, Daniel became more lost. The light began to fade as evening approached, and the forest transformed into an eerie labyrinth. Swearing under his breath, Daniel's frustration turned to fear when he heard a rustling from the trees. Unnatural noises filled the air, distant howls, growling, scratching. Panic set in as he heard the heavy breathing of a large animal. His heart pounding, he started to run blindly, not knowing which way was safety. Branches tore at his clothes, mud splashed over him, and his breath came in ragged gasps. After several minutes of frantic running, a small wooden shack with a light burning inside appeared through the trees. Daniel sprinted towards it, desperation giving him speed, and banged on the door with all his might. The door creaked open, revealing Elijah, his expression a mix of amusement and annoyance. "Do you not hear that well? I told you not to trespass on my land," he said dryly. Daniel, out of breath and terrified, begged Elijah to let him inside, insisting something was chasing him. Elijah laughed, a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to resonate with the woods themselves. "Fine, come in, but let this be a lesson to you, city boy," Elijah said, stepping aside to let Daniel enter the modest interior of the shack. Inside, the shack was warm and surprisingly cozy, a stark contrast to the wild chaos outside. Elijah watched with a smirk as Daniel tried to catch his breath, his expensive suit now torn and covered in mud. "There's more to this land than you know, Mr. Harrison. Perhaps now you'll think twice before you try to claim it as your own," Elijah said, his voice carrying a hint of warning. Daniel, still shaking from his ordeal, realized just how out of his depth he truly was. The woods, the land, and its enigmatic owner were not forces to be reckoned with lightly. As he stood there, trying to regain his composure, the real estate deal seemed trivial in comparison to the raw, untamed power of the ancient woodland and its guardian. Inside the rustic warmth of Elijah's shack, Daniel, still trembling from his harrowing experience, gathered the remnants of his shattered composure. What is in those woods?" he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Elijah's mocking smile widened. "Oh, the woods are full of surprises, things that the city folk like you can't even begin to understand," he replied, his tone laced with amusement. Determined to salvage something from this disastrous encounter, Daniel attempted to steer the conversation back to the land deal. "Mr. Elijah, about your land, surely we can negotiate a..." Elijah's demeanor abruptly shifted, his eyes flashing dangerously. "Negotiate? After you blatantly disregarded my warning and trespassed, I should throw you back out into the dark woods." His voice was a low growl, resonating with a barely contained anger. Daniel recoiled, fear etched on his face. "No, please. I beg you, don't do that. I didn't mean any harm," he whimpered, the memory of the unseen terrors in the woods fresh in his mind. Elijah's expression softened slightly, but his eyes remained hard. "Sit down, Mr. Harrison, and listen well. My family has been on this land for generations. This land is ours, bound by a legal clause that's as old as these woods. Under English law, the government can't set foot here unless I invite them, and I have no intention of extending such an invitation." Daniel, still shaken, nodded, absorbing the words. Elijah continued, his voice now calmer. "My family is cursed, afflicted with an illness many years ago. It's a part of who we are, tied to this land. I don't mind the curse. It's kept me away from the greed and pettiness of people. They spend their lives chasing wealth, clawing their way to the top, only to end up the same as everyone else. Worm food." As Elijah spoke, a sense of ancient sorrow seemed to envelop the room. Then a scratching sound at the door, accompanied by heavy breathing and low growling, broke the heavy silence. Daniel's eyes widened in terror, his heart pounding in his chest. Elijah, however, just smiled, almost fondly. "Ah, they're restless tonight," he said, his gaze drifting towards the door. Daniel looked from Elijah to the door and back, his panic rising. What is that?" "Just the creatures of the woods," Elijah said nonchalantly. "They won't harm us here. This shack is as much a part of the woods as they are." Daniel couldn't comprehend the calmness in Elijah's voice, the ease with which he accepted the presence of something so terrifyingly unknown. In that moment, Daniel realized how truly alien this world was to him, a world where ancient curses, mysterious creatures, and untamed wilderness were part of the everyday fabric of life. As the The scratching continued. Daniel sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the enormity of what he had stumbled into. Elijah's world was one of secrets and ancient bonds, a world far removed from the skyscrapers and contracts of Daniel's life. And in the heart of these woods, Daniel Harrison felt smaller and more insignificant than he ever had before. Elijah, sensing Daniel's escalating fear, chuckled softly. "Don't worry," he said, standing up and striding towards the door. He raised his voice, addressing the unseen creatures outside with a commanding tone. Suddenly, the scratching and growling ceased, and an eerie silence enveloped the shack. Daniel exhaled a sigh of relief, his body still trembling. "Now about this land," Elijah began, turning back to face him. "You see, I've been here for over 300 years. My father, 500 years before me." As he spoke, something extraordinary began to happen. Thick black hair sprouted on his hands and face, his features contorting and reshaping. "My curse, you see, is that I'm immortal. So, I really don't need anything you can offer," Elijah continued, his voice deepening and growing more guttural. His eyes changed, taking on a feral glow, while his teeth elongated into sharp fangs. "But I will accept one thing," he said, his transformation now nearly complete. Long, sharp claws protruded from his fingers, and his entire body was covered in thick, dark fur. Standing fully transformed in the confines of the shack, Elijah towered over Daniel, a true werewolf, his head nearly grazing the ceiling. Daniel, utterly petrified, cowered in the corner, his cries and pleas for mercy filling the small space. But Elijah, now fully embraced by his ancient curse, showed no sign of the man he once was. A blood-curdling scream echoed into the night, swallowed by the dense woods. None but the creatures of the forest heard it, their howls joining in a chorus that seemed both mournful and triumphant. The following day, back at the Hargrave real estate office, Richard Sterling sat at his desk, his expression one of annoyance and resignation. He placed an advertisement for a vacancy, muttering to himself, "Since Harrison's not back, I guess he failed." The deal for the woodland, now shrouded in an air of mystery and fear, remained untouched. Elijah's land and its ancient secrets would continue to exist untouched by the modern world, a reminder of the primal and untamed forces that lay just beyond the reach of human ambition and greed. And so, the tale of Daniel Harrison and his fateful encounter with the immortal guardian of the woods became yet another whispered legend in the mist-shrouded town, a cautionary tale of the price one pays when blinded by ambition and the dangerous folly of underestimating the ancient powers of the natural world. In the eerie glow of the full moon, a love story with a haunting twist unfolds. Jack, unsuspecting, falls deeply in love with Alara, a mysterious woman whose beauty is matched only by her secrecy. As their wedding vows echo through the ancient halls of his family mansion, a chilling truth unravels. Alara belongs to the very gypsy lineage his family condemned generations ago, a lineage cursed with the blood of werewolves. Consumed by a quest for revenge against the suffering inflicted upon her ancestors, Alara unleashes an ancient werewolf curse. Their union, a blend of love and ancient vendetta, now becomes a terrifying struggle for survival as the full moon rises. The quaint town of Silverpine was shrouded in mist as Thomas closed up the library for the evening. The air was cool, carrying the scent of pine and earth after the recent rain. He always loved this time of the day, the quiet moments just after sunset, when the world seemed to hold its breath. As he locked the door, he noticed a figure standing across the street. She was staring at the old Silver Pine estate that loomed over the town, its turrets silhouetted against the darkening sky. She was striking, with long dark hair that flowed like ink down her back, and her eyes, even from this distance, seemed to glimmer with an otherworldly hue. Curiosity piqued, Thomas approached her. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, gesturing towards the estate. "It's been here for centuries, part of the town's history." She turned to him, and her gaze was piercing. "Yes, it is beautiful," she replied, her voice melodic, yet tinged with a hint of sadness. "I'm Elara, by the way." "Thomas," he said, extending his hand. "I work at the library. Are you new in town?" "Yes," Elara smiled, a mysterious allure in her demeanor. "Just arrived today." They talked for hours, wandering the cobblestone streets of Silverpine. Elara's knowledge of literature and history fascinated Thomas, and her perspective on life was enchanting. She seemed to understand the very soul of the world, and in turn, she unraveled his own. In the days that followed, their connection deepened. They shared meals, walked through the moonlit woods, and Thomas showed her his favorite books in the library. He was smitten, utterly captivated by this enigmatic woman who had appeared so suddenly in his life. One evening, as they stood gazing at the stars from the hills overlooking Silverpine, Thomas's heart swelled with emotion. "Elara," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "these past weeks with you have been the happiest of my life. I know this is sudden, but I feel a connection with you that I can't explain. Will you marry me?" Elara looked at him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. For a moment, Thomas feared he had been too hasty, but then she smiled, her face softening in the moonlight. "Yes, Thomas," she said gently. "I will marry you." Joy surged through Thomas as he embraced her, unaware of the secrets she held or the shadow that her acceptance would cast over his life and the town of Silver Pine. Little did he know, his destiny was now irrevocably intertwined with Elara's, and the echoes of a long-forgotten past were about to resurface. The night was unforgiving, a tempest of snow and wind howling through the Silver Pine estate as if nature itself was enraged. In the heart of the storm, a caravan of gypsies struggled against the blizzard, their faces etched with despair and exhaustion. Among them was a young woman, her eyes a striking contrast against the pallor of the snow, filled with a fierce determination despite the tears that froze on her cheeks. This was Elara's great-grandmother, Isadora. The gypsies had lived peacefully on the outskirts of Silverpine for generations, their vibrant culture woven into the tapestry of the town. But that night, they were being driven out, forced off their land by the ancestors of Thomas, the current lords of Silverpine. Isadora held her young daughter close, whispering promises of safety, even as her heart broke, knowing the truth. The freezing storm was more than just a natural occurrence. It was a weapon, wielded by those who sought their land and feared their differences. The gypsies were blamed for misfortunes and mistrusted for their nomadic lifestyle. That night, the hatred and greed of the Silverpine ancestors culminated in a merciless decree: leave or perish. As the caravan trudged through the snow, the brutal cold claimed the weak and the old. Isadora watched in silent horror as her people, her family, succumbed to the storm. With each life lost, a seed of vengeance took root in her heart, a vow to the spirits of her ancestors that their suffering would not be forgotten. Decades passed, and the pain of that night became a whispered legend among the surviving gypsies. But for Elara, it was a legacy, a mission etched into her very being. Back in the present, Elara stood on the balcony of the Silverpine estate, now her home through her marriage to Thomas. The moon cast a pale light on her face, highlighting the enigmatic smile that curled her lips. As she looked out over the land that was once her family's, the memories of her ancestors' suffering fused with her own resolve. Her smile was not one of happiness, but of a plan set into motion, a promise to her forebears that the wrongs against them would be righted. In her heart, the storm of the past raged as fiercely as ever, and she knew the time for retribution was drawing near. Unknown to Thomas, his beloved Elara was not just his wife. She was the bearer of a centuries-old grudge, and the heir to a curse that would soon reveal its true nature under the light of the full moon. Thomas and Elara set out early one crisp morning, the sun casting a golden glow over the fields surrounding Silverpine. Elara suggested they explore the woodlands at the edge of town, a place Thomas had seldom ventured into. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and he found himself eagerly agreeing. As they walked, the woods seemed to embrace them, the ancient trees whispering secrets of times long past. Elara seemed particularly attuned to the forest, moving with a grace that seemed almost otherworldly. Eventually, they came upon an old burial ground, hidden away and overgrown, a forgotten chapter in Silverpine's history. Intrigued, Thomas followed Elara as she weaved between the weathered headstones, her steps purposeful. Then, hidden beneath a cascade of ivy, they discovered an old crypt, its stone facade worn by the years, but still standing strong. "Let's see what's inside," Elara said, her voice tinged with a curious excitement. The crypt's heavy door creaked ominously as they pushed it open, revealing the dark, musty chamber within. Their footsteps echoed as they explored, the beam of Thomas's flashlight revealing rows of tombs. The air was thick with the scent of wool, earth, and age. As they delved deeper, they came across a secluded section of the crypt. Here the tombs bore the distinctive markings of a gypsy family. Thomas could see the sorrow in Elara's eyes as she traced the engravings with her fingers. One tomb, larger and more ornate than the others, was sealed shut, its surface undisturbed for many years. "We should open it," Elara whispered, a strange intensity in her voice. Despite his reservations, Thomas helped her try to move the heavy stone lid, but it refused to budge. Frustrated and a little unnerved, they decided to rest outside, beneath the shelter of an old oak. Hours later, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, they returned to the crypt. To their astonishment, the sealed tomb now bore a huge crack down its center, as if some great force had tried to escape from within. The air around it was colder, charged with a palpable energy. Elara's eyes shone with a mix of triumph and something deeper, more ancient. She looked at Thomas, a knowing smile playing on her lips. "It's a sign," she said softly. "The past isn't as buried as we thought." Thomas felt a chill run down his spine, a sense of foreboding he couldn't shake off. The crypt, cracked tomb, Elara's enigmatic reaction, it all felt like pieces of a puzzle he was only beginning to understand. As they left the burial ground, the shadows of the crypt seemed to linger, a silent sentinel guarding secrets that were slowly clawing their way to the surface. The night enveloped Silverpine in a shroud of darkness, the only light coming from the sliver of the crescent moon. Thomas lay awake, his mind replaying the day's eerie discoveries. It was then he heard it, a howl, deep and resonant, slicing through the night's stillness. It was unlike any sound he had heard before, filled with a dark, haunting quality that sent shivers down his spine. The following morning, the town of Silverpine awoke to a scene of horror. Livestock were found slaughtered in the fields, their bodies mangled in a grotesque display. The townspeople murmured in fears and confusion, but the worst was yet to come. On the outskirts of town, near the edge of the woods, they found a man, torn to shreds as if mauled by a wild beast. The brutality of the attack was chilling, leaving the villagers in a state of shock and fear. Amidst this chaos, Thomas realized Elara was missing. Panic gripped him as he searched their home, calling her name, but there was no sign of her. Driven by a growing sense of dread, he made his way to the old burial ground, the memory of the previous day gnawing at him. The burial ground was eerily silent as he entered. Then he heard it, a soft chanting, a voice he knew all too well. Following the sound, he found Elara kneeling before the broken tomb, her eyes closed, murmuring in an ancient gypsy language. "Elara," Thomas exclaimed, a mix of relief and confusion in his voice. "What are you doing here?" Elara looked up, her expression one of solemnity. "I thought perhaps what happened last night was a consequence of us disturbing this place," she said softly. "I came here to apologize to the spirits, to seek their forgiveness." Thomas's fear subsided, replaced by a bemused affection for her beliefs. He laughed gently, reaching out to comfort her. "It's okay, Elara. I don't think the spirits are responsible for what happened. Let's go home." As they walked away from the burial ground, Thomas glanced back at the crypt, its secrets seemingly at rest once more. But Elara cast a lingering look over her shoulder, a subtle, knowing smile gracing her lips. In her eyes, there was a glint of satisfaction, a hint of a plan unfolding just as she had envisioned. Unseen to Thomas, the lines of past and present were blurring, and Elara was at the heart of it, a bridge between the vengeful spirits of her ancestors and the unsuspecting town of Silver Pine. The night's horrors were just the beginning, and Elara was the key to a mystery that was slowly unraveling under the watchful gaze of the moon. The atmosphere in Silver Pine was tense, a palpable fear hanging in the air as the townsfolk prepared for another night of uncertainty. Street patrols were organized, and guards stood vigilant at the farms. The town was a fortress, braced for the return of the mysterious beast. Inside their home, Thomas and Elara sat in silence, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on them. However, Elara's demeanor was unusually stern and direct, a stark contrast to her usual gentle nature. Thomas couldn't help but feel unsettled by this change. As the night deepened, a distant howl pierced the quiet, a sound that seemed to resonate with the very soul of Silver Pine. Elara stood up abruptly, a smile curving her lips. The smile sent a shiver of terror down Thomas's spine. "We'd best be careful, Elara," he said, his voice tinged with apprehension. "We?" she replied, her tone enigmatic. Thomas clutched his shotgun, loaded and ready, a sense of foreboding enveloping him. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the back of the house. Something had smashed through the window. With the town's focus elsewhere, Thomas realized they were isolated, vulnerable. A gust of wind howled through the broken window, sending lamps crashing to the floor and chairs toppling over. Then, amidst the chaos, Thomas saw it, a creature of nightmares, half man, half beast, lurking in the shadows, its eyes burning with pure hatred. Without hesitation, Thomas aimed his shotgun at the beast and fired. The creature let out a horrendous howl, a sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house before it fled into the night. Elara stood motionless, watching the beast disappear. Her expression was unreadable, a mask that concealed her true emotions. Thomas, still gripping his shotgun, turned to her, searching for some explanation in her eyes, but Elara remained silent, her gaze fixed on the darkness outside, where the beast had vanished. The night was far from over, and the true nature of the terror that haunted Silverpine was yet to be revealed. As the wind continued to howl through the broken window, Thomas felt a growing sense of dread. The beast was out there, and it was clear that this nightmare was only just beginning. Silverpine had settled into an uneasy quiet in the days following the night of terror. The townsfolk, still on edge, clung to Thomas's assurance that he had slain the beast with his shotgun. They wanted to believe the nightmare was over, that their town was safe once more. Thomas busied himself with repairs around the house, replacing the shattered windows and fixing the damage wrought by the creature's invasion. He tried to shake off the lingering unease, convincing himself that the threat was gone. Meanwhile, Alara's actions were shrouded in secrecy. Unbeknownst to Thomas or anyone else in the town, she spent her days at the tomb, immersed in ancient rituals. The crypt, with its cracked tomb and whispered secrets, had become her sanctuary, a place where she could connect with the spirits of her ancestors. Her chants, in the old gypsy language, echoed off the stone walls, a haunting melody that seemed to resonate with the very air around her. With each word, each intonation, she felt the power of her lineage flow through her, strengthening her resolve for what was to come. On this particular day, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows over the burial ground, Alara stood up. Her eyes, alight with a fierce determination, gazed at the cracked tomb. The air around her seemed to pulse with energy, as if responding to her presence. "It is time," she said to herself, her voice a mere whisper, but laden with purpose. Without another glance at the tomb, Alara turned and made her way back home. Her steps were confident, each one bringing her closer to the culmination of a plan centuries in the making. As she walked, the town of Silverpine lay ahead, unsuspecting and peaceful in the twilight. But beneath the calm, a storm was brewing, a reckoning that would soon shake the very foundations of the town and reveal the true nature of the nightmare that had descended upon them. Alara, the link between past and present, between the spirits of her ancestors and the unsuspecting townsfolk, was ready to set the final act into motion. The sun had set on Silverpine, casting long shadows across the town as Thomas and Alara sat in their home. Thomas had taken every precaution, building a fortified safe room within the house. Its massive bolted door was designed to withstand any force, a sanctuary against the horrors that lurked outside. As they sat together, the eerie calm was shattered by a familiar and chilling howl. Thomas's heart sank. "It's back," he said, a tremor in his voice. He urged Alara towards the safe room. "Quickly, go inside. I'll handle this." With Alara safely inside, Thomas loaded his shotgun, his hands shaking slightly. He waited, his breath shallow, as the tension in the air grew thicker. Then, with a terrifying crash, the beast burst through the window, its monstrous form, half man, half beast, eyes burning with a feral hatred. Thomas fired, but the creature seemed unfazed, continuing its relentless advance. Realizing the futility of his efforts, Thomas retreated to the safe room. He bolted the door behind him, his heart pounding. "There's no way it will get through there," he assured himself. But then, a low growling filled the room. Thomas spun around, his blood turning to ice as he witnessed Alara beginning to transform. Her body contorted, her features morphing into a grotesque fusion of woman and beast. "There's also no escape," she snarled, her voice a guttural echo of her human self. "My great-grandfather waits outside, while I'm here with you." Thomas recoiled in horror as the truth dawned on him. Alara, the woman he loved, was part of the nightmare. "Why?" he gasped, barely able to comprehend the unfolding scene. Elara's eyes, now a glowing amber, bore into him. "Vengeance," she growled. "Your ancestors destroyed my family, left us to die in the cold. Now their bloodline ends with you." Thomas's pleas were drowned out by her growling. The room was filled with a palpable sense of dread, the walls seeming to close in on him. There was no escape, no way out of the fate that awaited him. As Elara advanced, her form now fully that of a werewolf, Thomas's screams echoed through the safe room. The sound of his terror was the last thing heard before a haunting silence fell over the house. Outside, the beast that was once Elara's great-grandfather howled, a mournful sound that carried through the night. In the town of Silver Pine, under the watchful gaze of the moon, a tragic tale of revenge reached its bloody conclusion, a cycle of hatred and retribution coming full circle. The screams faded, and the night reclaimed its silence, the shadows of the past forever etched into the legacy of Silver Pine. In the heart of a city where normalcy reigns lies a tale that ventures into the extraordinary and the supernatural. Imagine a life not of your choosing, where every day feels like walking on the edge of a blade. A life where your true self is shackled and your deepest desires are just distant echoes. Now, picture a man, Danny, and a woman, Amanda, each tormented by a past that haunts them, each dreaming of a power they cannot comprehend. But what if the very thing they dream of, the primal force they yearn to unleash, lies dormant within them? What happens when the line between man and beast blurs and a new, terrifying power is awakened? Join me as we delve into a world where the full moon reveals hidden truths, where fortunes change in the blink of an eye, and where the beast within becomes a source of unimaginable strength. This is not just a story. It's an odyssey of transformation, freedom, and the raw nature of humanity. Are you ready to witness a journey like no other? A journey where every turn is unexpected, every emotion is intense, and every moment challenges the very essence of what it means to be human. Welcome to the thrilling, chilling tale of Danny and Amanda. This is their story. This is the legend of the urban beasts. Stay with me and uncover the mysteries hidden beneath the light of the full moon. In the dusty corners of the schoolyard, 10-year-old Danny Mitchell stood alone, his eyes fixed on the ground. His classmates' laughter pierced the air, a cruel soundtrack to his daily torment. Danny, small and timid, was an easy target for the bullies. Today, like many days before, they circled him, hurling insults and jeers. "Hey, Danny, gonna cry for mummy?" taunted the ringleader, Jake, as he shoved Danny. Danny's hands trembled, but he remained silent, his gaze never leaving the gravel beneath his feet. That weekend, as a rare treat, Danny's parents let him stay up late. The glow of the television lit the darkened living room, casting shadows that danced on the walls. Legend of the Werewolf flickered on the screen, a story of a man who transformed into a powerful beast. Danny watched, mesmerized, as the man on screen used his newfound strength to overcome his adversaries. "If only I could do that," Danny whispered to himself, a faint glimmer of hope sparking in his eyes. In the weeks that followed, Danny's notebook filled with sketches of fierce werewolves, their teeth bared and claws sharp. He became obsessed, reading every book and watching every movie he could find about these mythical creatures. Months later, the bullying continued. This time, something inside Danny snapped. As Jake pushed him, Danny turned, a feral snarl escaping his lips. His fingernails, filed to points like claws, slashed across Jake's face. The bully stumbled back in shock, blood trickling from the scratch marks. The schoolyard fell silent. Danny stood there, panting, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and exhilaration. The repercussions were immediate. The teachers reprimanded him, and his parents were called in. They sat in the principal's office, a mix of concern and disbelief on their faces.
Danny, why would you do something like this?
His mother asked, her voice trembling. Danny couldn't answer. He didn't fully understand it himself. All he knew was that in that moment of rage, he had felt powerful, untouchable. The chapter closes with a fast forward to the present day. Danny, now 36, sits in the dim light of his living room, the flicker of another werewolf movie illuminating his solitary figure. The memories of that day in the schoolyard, the feeling of unleashed power, still linger in the corners of his mind, a dark echo that has followed him into adulthood. Ah, my dear nocturnal scholars of the macabre. It's time for a quick scare break. As we linger in these shadowy realms, a small favour I dare to ask. If my tales of terror bring you thrills, do not let our journey end here. Hit like, subscribe, and join our dark congregation. Now shall we delve deeper into the abyss. Let's embrace the darkness once more. Let's get back to the shadows. Danny's life was a patchwork of broken relationships and dead-end jobs, each chapter closing with the same sense of unfulfillment. His one constant companion, his escape, was his impressive collection of werewolf lore. Shelves lined with books, DVDs, Blu-rays, and an array of memorabilia filled his small apartment, a shrine to the mythical creature that had captivated his imagination since childhood. In these stories, he found solace, the idea of transformation, of a man becoming a beast to solve his problems with ferocity and strength, was a balm to his bruised ego. When the weight of the world pressed down on him, Danny retreated into this world, finding a perverse comfort in the notion of a beast unleashed. That night, as Danny prepared for bed, he selected an audio tale from his collection, a story of a werewolf's revenge. The narrator's voice, deep and haunting, filled the room as Danny drifted into sleep. In his dreams, Danny was the embodiment of the werewolf myth. He ran on all fours, powerful and unrestrained. He attacked those who had wronged him throughout his life, exacting vengeance with savage glee. The bullies from his school days fell under his claws, their taunts turning into screams. He hunted down the man his ex had left him for, a predator stalking his prey. His old boss, the one who had belittled him for years, cowered in a corner as Danny towered over him, a figure of fear and dominance. These dreams were a regular escape for Danny, a nocturnal adventure where he could be everything he wasn't in his waking life. Here, he was not passive and kind, but powerful, vengeful, and feared. He awoke in the early hours of the morning, his sheets damp with sweat, his heart pounding with a primal intensity. For a moment, as he lay there in the dark, he felt invincible, his testosterone levels surging, a stark contrast to his usual, unassuming self. After a refreshing shower, Danny checked his social media, scrolling through the mundanity of others' lives. A message notification caught his attention. It was from his ex, the one who had walked away without a backward glance. She wanted to meet up for dinner. The message stirred a mix of emotions in Danny. Part of him yearned for closure, for some kind of understanding of why she had left. Another part, the part that roamed in his dreams, bristled at the thought of facing her again. As he stared at the screen, the image of her in his dream, the fear in her eyes as he had hunted her, flashed in his mind. A shiver ran down his spine, a reminder of the beast that lurked in the shadows of his subconscious. With a deep breath, Danny typed out a reply, agreeing to the dinner. As he sent the message, he couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. This dinner could be a step towards healing or a descent into the darker corners of his psyche that he had so long entertained in his dreams. Danny sat across from his ex in the dimly lit corner of a cheap chain restaurant. Her words flowed like a river of regrets and apologies, lamenting the man she left him for, who cheated on her.
I should have never left you, Danny,
She said,
you were always so reliable, kind, someone I could trust.
Danny listened, but his gaze was distant, lost in the void of his thoughts. Those qualities she praised, reliability, kindness, trustworthiness, were the very aspects of himself he had grown to despise. They were the chains that bound him to a life of submission, of being overlooked and walked over. As he was about to respond, a commotion erupted. A group of masked men burst into the restaurant, shouting demands for money, their voices laced with menace. The diners cowered, their evening shattered by fear. One of the robbers, in his haste, pushed Danny aside roughly to reach the counter. As he hit the floor, the words of his ex echoed in his mind. Kind, reliable, trusting. To Danny, they translated to weakness, the reason he had always been a doormat for others. Rage boiled within him, a burning tide that washed away reason. He stood up, his ex's whispers of caution unheard. In a swift movement, fueled by years of pent-up anger, Danny lunged at one of the robbers, knocking him to the ground. The robber's head struck the counter, rendering him unconscious. Another turned towards Danny, swinging a baseball bat that connected with a thud against his shoulder. Pain seared through him, but Danny's mind was ablaze with a singular thought. Pain is just weakness, leaving the body. With a ferocity that surprised even himself, he swung his fists, connecting with the masked face. The robber stumbled back, unprepared for this sudden counterattack. The last robber, witnessing the chaos, hesitated. Danny turned to him, baring his teeth, a primal growl escaping his throat. "Let's get out of here. He's a madman!" the robber exclaimed, and they fled. The aftermath was a blur of police questions and grateful thanks from the restaurant manager. His ex had slipped away in the confusion, leaving Danny alone amidst the chaos he had created. As he prepared to leave, a strange woman caught his eye. Seated calmly in a corner, she seemed out of place amidst the disarray. She was strikingly beautiful, with long brown hair and an air of elegance that spoke of wealth and sophistication. Unlike the other diners, she hadn't left, continuing her meal as if nothing had happened. As Danny walked past her, she looked up and smiled at him, a smile that was not just polite, but held a depth of intrigue and curiosity. It was a smile not usually directed at someone like Danny. Her eyes lingered on him, hinting at a recognition of something more than what appeared on the surface. Danny left the restaurant with a mixture of emotions swirling inside him. The night had taken an unexpected turn, revealing a side of him he had only dared to explore in his dreams. And now, this mysterious woman's smile lingered in his mind, a silent acknowledgement of the beast he had let loose. Lying in bed, Danny nursed his aching shoulder, the pain a dull reminder of the night's events. A knock at his door shattered the silence. Who could it be at this hour? He wondered, half expecting to see his ex on the other side. But when he opened the door, it was the mysterious woman from the restaurant, Elizabeth Talbot, standing before him with an air of sophistication and an unmistakable aura of dominance. "May I speak with you?" she asked, her voice carrying a tone of command that Danny found himself unable to resist. He ushered her in, curiosity mingling with a sense of intrigue. As Elizabeth spoke, Danny was captivated by her confidence. She probed into his life with unsettling accuracy. "All your life, people have put you down. Why is that, Danny?" He hesitated before replying, "I guess I've always felt the need to please people." "Yes, to please people," she echoed. "To give to people something they don't deserve. Do you want to see the pain of your life benefit others? Is this your duty? To give yourself with no recognition or respect? To have people like that woman in the restaurant use you, justifying cheating and causing you pain because you're kind and understanding? For people to use your passive nature as an excuse to walk all over you and laugh at you when they find something better? Danny's voice was a mix of anger and despair.
I'd rather die.
Then why don't you, Danny? Elizabeth challenged. Those times and people are upon you. Isn't it time to stop letting others walk all over you as they improve their lives off your kindness? Isn't it time to improve your life instead? In a sudden movement, she grabbed him, throwing him onto the bed. They spent the entire night in a passionate embrace, a whirlwind of emotions and desires. Exhausted, they lay next to each other. Elizabeth's voice, now softer, asked, Danny, is it your time to change once and for all? Yes, he replied without hesitation, a newfound determination in his voice. As he watched, Elizabeth's hand transformed before his eyes. Her smooth, delicate skin gave way to something much more primal. Hair sprouted, veins bulged, and claws erupted from her fingers. Danny's heart raced, not with fear, but with an exhilarating realization. Elizabeth was not just a woman, she was something more, something that resonated with the beast he had harbored within himself all these years. In her, he saw the embodiment of his deepest desires and fears, a mirror to the transformation he had longed for. As he gazed at her transformed hand, a sense of clarity washed over him. This was his moment of truth, the crossroads where he could embrace the beast within or continue to live a life of submission. Danny's choice would determine the path of his destiny, a journey into the unknown realms of his own soul. As Elizabeth's hand left a deep scratch on Danny's chest, he felt a surge of pain and exhilaration. Her voice, laced with a mixture of excitement and solemnity, broke the silence.
I saw your rage, Danny. The beast within you. It's been many years since I've seen such a primal spirit.
She moved gracefully to retrieve her bag, thrown carelessly on the floor. It's been nearly 300 years for me, she continued, a hint of weariness in her tone. I thought I'd have to wait forever.
And then I saw you. I saw the primal force within you.
From her bag, she produced a small silver dagger. As she handed it to him, Danny noticed it searing her skin, leaving behind red marks. Her instructions were clear and chilling.
Take it. If this is truly what you want, if you are ready to embrace who you truly are, then thrust this dagger into my heart. You will become who you were born to be.
Danny hesitated, his voice faltering.
I can't do that.
Her response was sharp and cutting.
Shut up. That's Danny speaking. Where is the beast, you cowering excuse for a human being? All your life people have used you as a doormat. Do this, and it all ends. You will be free.
Something primal within Danny stirred, a rage and confidence he had never felt before. The scratch on his chest burned with an intensity that was both painful and exhilarating. Without further thought, driven by this newfound primal instinct, he plunged the silver dagger into Elizabeth's heart, his scream mingling with hers. As the dagger pierced her heart, Elizabeth began to age rapidly, her voice barely a whisper.
Thank you, Danny. When you've had enough, find another with the beast and pass on this gift.
Her body crumbled to the floor, aging rapidly until nothing was left but dust. A surge of raw, primal energy coursed through Danny. He felt a power he had never known, a fierce rage and strength that was both terrifying and invigorating. The next morning, Danny awoke, the events of the night swirling in his mind like a vivid dream. Was it all just a figment of his imagination? He touched his chest, feeling the scratch that still burned slightly, a tangible reminder of the surreal experience. As he sat up, the world seemed different. The colours were more vibrant, the sounds more acute. He felt a strength and confidence coursing through him, a sense of power he had never known. Danny knew, deep down, that this was no dream. He had undergone a transformation, one that had awakened the beast within, changing his life forever. Danny's eyes widened as he rummaged through Elizabeth's belongings, scattered on the floor. Her clothes lay in a heap, but it was her bag that drew his attention. Inside, he found an envelope addressed to him. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it, revealing a letter and a bank card. "If you're reading this, I take it you chose to not let others treat you as a thing for their gain," the letter began. "When the next full moon rises, you will change. But that's not all. Your life too has transformed. This bank card is yours, along with the details. My entire life savings are now at your disposal." The idea that Elizabeth could have set up a bank account in his name puzzled him momentarily. She must have had connections, perhaps using false documentation or leveraging her long life to manipulate the system. The underworld she belonged to was likely full of such mysteries. Hastily, Danny turned on his computer and entered the bank details. The balance displayed on the screen made him stagger. £34 million. A fortune beyond his wildest dreams, now at his fingertips. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. It was his ex, her voice tinged with faux concern. "Hi, Danny. Just wanted to see how you were after the other night." But Danny was not the same man she had left. "Don't ever contact me again," he said firmly, shutting the door in her face. He felt no regret, only a newfound sense of self-assurance. As he sat down, Danny pondered his life. Just 24 hours ago, such a fortune would have sent him into a frenzy of materialistic planning, but now his mind was occupied with more significant concerns. Money seemed trivial compared to the transformation he was undergoing. His mind was clear, focused, calculating, and strong. He was no longer the passive, easily manipulated Danny. He was something else, something more. As he contemplated his new existence, a sense of purpose filled him. He wasn't just wealthy, he was powerful in a way he had never known. The full moon's approach loomed in his mind, not as a fear, but as an impending revelation of his true nature. Danny's life had taken a dramatic turn, and he knew there was no going back. He was on the brink of discovering not just the limits of his new wealth, but the depths of the beast within him. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, Danny felt ready to face whatever came his way. In a small chain restaurant, Danny sat alone, his meal in front of him. Years had passed since the fateful events that transformed him. He had experienced the full moon's pull many times, feeling his body contort and change into the beast within. He'd come to understand this part of him, to harness it in a way Elizabeth never had the chance to teach him. His heightened senses picked up a conversation from across the room. A man, oozing arrogance, was speaking to a woman. "Well, let's see how it goes tonight. If we get on okay and you make me happy, you know what I mean, then maybe we can get back together," he said with a smug grin. Danny's eyes fixed on the woman. Her name was Amanda, and he could sense something in her. A smouldering rage, a hidden fire. It reminded him of how Elizabeth must have seen him that night at the restaurant. The man's slimy smile widened as Amanda leaned back in her chair, seemingly surrendering to his will. Danny felt a surge of protectiveness, a primal urge to intervene. He stood up and walked over to their table. "Hi, Amanda. It's been such a long time. You look amazing," he said with a confidence that was as natural to him now as breathing. Amanda looked up, startled, then intrigued. The man before her exuded wealth and a captivating self-assurance. She had no recollection of him, but something about him was irresistibly alluring. "It's been way too long," Danny continued. his gaze never leaving Amanda. "Ditch this loser, who can't even pay the bill for the meal without your help, and let's live." The words struck a chord in Amanda, awakening a desire for something more, something better than the life she was settling for. She began to rise from her chair. The man she was with sputtered, "Who are you calling a loser?" But his bravado melted under Danny's intense gaze. The primal force within Danny was palpable, silencing any challenge with a mere look. Amanda stood up, drawn to Danny as if by a magnetic force. Together they walked out of the restaurant, leaving her date speechless and deflated. They climbed into Danny's Porsche 911, the embodiment of his new life. A life of power, control, and freedom. As they drove off, Danny felt a kinship with Amanda. She was like him before his transformation, trapped, yearning for something more. He wondered if he could offer her the same liberation that Elizabeth had given him, but deep down, he knew it wasn't just about saving her. It was about the beast within him, always seeking, always hungry. The night ahead was full of possibilities, and for the first time in a long time, Danny felt truly alive. As Danny drove through the night with Amanda, their conversation revealed eerie similarities in their lives. Like Danny, Amanda had been walked over her entire life, her spirit trampled by those who saw her as nothing more than a doormat. She confided in Danny about her dreams, where she ran wild as a beast, exacting vengeance on those who had wronged her. The man from the restaurant, her ex, was a dark chapter in her life. He had abused and beaten her, yet she felt too weak to deny him. Danny wondered if her inner beast had been fully trapped, just as his had been before his transformation. "Want to make him pay?" Danny asked, a predatory glint in his eye. "Oh yes," Amanda replied, with a fervor that matched his own. Without warning, Danny's hand morphed into a clawed, beast-like appendage, and he scratched her. "I have no idea if this will work, but it's a full moon tonight. I'm not sure if there can be two beasts, but I don't see why not." That night, under the full moon, they found themselves at the doorstep of Amanda's ex. Inside, another woman was subjected to his abusive nature. The knock on the door was abrupt, and as he opened it, Amanda pushed past him, Danny following closely behind. "What the hell are you doing here?" the man demanded, his voice a mix of surprise and anger. Amanda turned to the cowering woman. "Living for others, being used by them, is not living at all. It's a mere existence, a shadow of what life could be. True living is embracing yourself, your desires, your needs. It's about taking control of your destiny, not being a pawn in someone else's game." The woman, hearing Amanda's words, saw a flicker of hope and empowerment. She left the flat, leaving Amanda and Danny alone with the man. "And now for you," Amanda said, her voice cold and determined. As the transformation began, her body convulsed, bones reshaping and muscles expanding. Fur sprouted from her skin, her face elongating into a lupine snout. Her fingers stretched into claws, and her eyes glowed with a feral intensity. The man's arrogant facade crumbled into terror at the sight of this horrifying metamorphosis. The small flat was soon filled with the sounds of terror and the roars of a newly unleashed beast. Amanda, now a werewolf, unleashed years of pent-up rage and pain upon the man who had tormented her. Danny watched, a mix of horror and admiration, as Amanda embraced her true nature, a beast unchained after a lifetime of imprisonment. The night's events marked a turning point, not just for Amanda, but for Danny as well. He had initiated another into this cursed and powerful existence, a companion in the dark journey he had embarked upon. The world outside the small flat remained oblivious to the primal forces unleashed within, forces that would forever change the lives of those entangled in their wake. Under the bright light of the full moon, the city lay in a deceptive calm. In the shadows, however, a different story unfolded. Two wild beasts, Danny and Amanda, newly transformed, roamed the streets. Their movements were a blend of grace and power, their howls a chorus of newfound freedom and primal joy. As they ran, their powerful muscles rippling under moonlit fur, Danny and Amanda experienced a sense of liberation that was exhilarating and profound. It was a liberation that went beyond the physical transformation. It was an awakening of their true selves, unbound by societal norms and expectations. For Danny, this freedom was the embodiment of living for oneself, a stark contrast to the life he had led before. No longer was he confined by the need to please others, to conform to a role that left him feeling empty and powerless. He was now guided by his own desires, his own will to live a life of his choosing. The feeling was intoxicating, a heady mix of power and autonomy. Amanda, too, reveled in this newfound freedom. For so long, she had been a victim, her life dictated by others who saw her as nothing more than an object to be used and discarded. Now, as she ran alongside Danny, she felt a surge of self-worth and independence. She was no longer a pawn in someone else's game. She was the master of her destiny. Together, they embodied the philosophy of living for oneself, of pursuing one's own happiness as the highest moral purpose. Their transformation was not just physical, but philosophical, a rejection of the chains that had bound them to a life of servitude and misery. As they moved through the city, the howls of Danny and Amanda were not just sounds of wild beasts, but a declaration of their newfound freedom and individuality. They were no longer defined by what others expected of them, but by their own choices, their own desires. The night of the full moon was not just a transformation, it was a rebirth. Danny and Amanda, once trapped by the circumstances of their lives, were now free to explore the world on their terms, guided by their own values and desires. The city, unaware of the profound change that had occurred in its shadows, continued its slumber, while two liberated souls embraced their true nature under the glow of the moon. Three friends venture deep into the woods, drawn by tales of a sinister tree harbouring an ancient evil. Little do they know, this monstrous entity hungers for revenge, and it's ready to help them settle old scores with those who've wronged them, at a terrifying cost. In the small, sleepy town of Elmswood, nestled at the edge of a dense and sprawling forest, three friends gathered at their favourite spot, a cosy corner in the town's oldest cafe, the Rusty Kettle. It was a rainy afternoon, the kind that made the town feel even more isolated from the rest of the world.
Have you guys heard about the Whispering Woods legend?
Asked Emma, her eyes sparkling with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. She was the adventurous one in the group, always keen on exploring the unknown. Her friends, Luke and Hannah, exchanged a glance. Luke, a tall, athletic guy with a skeptical mind, shrugged.
You mean that old story about the creature in the woods? That's just a tale to scare kids, Em.
Hannah, a quiet, thoughtful girl with a love for local history, chimed in.
It's more than just a story. My grandma used to tell me about it. She said there's something ancient and unnatural living in those woods, under an old tree.
The cafe was filled with the sound of rain tapping against the windows and the low hum of other customers chatting. Emma leaned in closer, lowering her voice.
They say it's been trapped for centuries. A creature with massive teeth and thick fur, but the creepiest part is that it can mimic human voices, luring people into the woods by imitating their loved ones.
Luke rolled his eyes, but was visibly intrigued.
and you believe that.
Why don't we find out?
Emma proposed, her eyes gleaming with excitement.
Let's go to the Whispering Woods this evening. If there's any truth to the legend, tonight's the perfect night to discover it.
Hannah hesitated, fidgeting with her coffee cup.
I don't know, Emma. It sounds dangerous.
Come on, Han. It'll be an adventure. We'll stick together. And Luke, or you don't believe in the legend anyway, right? What harm could it do to check it out?
After a moment of silence, Luke sighed, a grin spreading across his face.
All right, we'll do it. But if we find nothing but trees and squirrels, I'm going to remind you of this every time you bring up another legend.
Emma clapped her hands in excitement.
It's settled then. We'll meet here at dusk and head into the Whispering Woods. Who knows what we'll find?
As the afternoon waned, the friends finished their coffees and parted ways, each lost in their thoughts about the impending adventure. The rain continued to fall, casting a gloomy shadow over Elmswood, as if nature itself was aware of the eerie journey the friends were about to embark on. The legend of the Whispering Woods, a tale woven into the fabric of the town for generations, was about to be explored, and none of them could foresee the chain of horrifying events they were about to unleash. The dense forest of the Whispering Woods loomed before Emma, Luke, and Hannah as they stood at its threshold, the dying light of the day casting long shadows between the trees. The air was thick with the earthy scent of damp soil and the faint, unsettling rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. The friends, armed with flashlights and an unspoken bond of curiosity, ventured into the woods, their footsteps muffled by the mossy ground. As they delved deeper, the forest seemed to close in around them, the trees older and more gnarled, as if they were entering a different world, a forgotten part of time. It wasn't long before they stumbled upon an ancient tree, towering and twisted, its bark etched with carvings and symbols that seemed to dance eerily in the flashlight beams. The ground around the tree was a macabre scene. Bones and remnants of fresh kills lay scattered, a chilling testament to the legend they had only whispered about in the safety of the cafe. At the base of the tree, there was a small opening, just large enough for a hand to fit through, or for a small animal to enter. A sudden, low growling emanated from the hole, a sound so primal and unnerving that it sent shivers down their spines. Without a word, they turned and fled, the underbrush scratching at their clothes as they ran. Once they were a safe distance away, hidden by a thicket, Luke, panting heavily, said,
Let's watch for a while, see if anything happens.
They huddled together, their initial giggles and jokes soon fading into an anxious silence as they focused on the ominous tree. As the sky darkened, a small rabbit, unaware of the danger, hopped towards the tree, sniffing curiously around it. Without warning, a hand, or what resembled a hand, emerged from the hole. It was covered in fur, with long, grotesque claws. In a swift, almost unnatural movement, it grabbed the rabbit. A muffled noise followed, and then an unsettling quiet. The friends exchanged looks of shock and disbelief. The legend was no longer just a story. It was real, and it was more horrifying than they could have imagined. As darkness enveloped the forest, they agreed to return home and come back the next day, armed with better cameras and equipment. They needed proof. They needed to understand what lurked within the Whispering Woods. But as they made their way back through the shadowy forest, each of them couldn't shake off the feeling that they had just awakened something ancient and malevolent. Luke stepped out of his house, the morning sun barely cresting the horizon. In his hand, he clutched a camera, his mind set on capturing whatever truth lay hidden within the Whispering Woods. As he made his way to his car, A familiar and unwelcome voice called out to him.
"Where are you going, pretty boy?"
Ben sneered, flanked by two of his usual cronies. Ben had been the bane of Luke's school days, a relentless bully who seemed to take pleasure in tormenting others. Luke's grip tightened on the camera.
Just out for some photography.
He replied, trying to keep his voice steady. Ben scoffed, stepping closer.
"And where are those two girls you're always hanging around with? We're in the mood for partying."
His friends laughed, a harsh sound that grated on Luke's nerves. Before Luke could react, Ben shoved him hard.
"Make sure you be sharing now,"
he taunted.
"Those girls look sweet."
His friends echoed his laughter, pushing Luke again. Frustration boiling within him, Luke quickly got into his car and drove away, leaving Ben and his cronies behind. He met up with Emma and Hannah a few minutes later, his mood visibly dampened by the encounter.
Everything okay, Luke?
Hannah asked, noticing his troubled expression.
Yeah, just Ben and his goons.
Luke replied, forcing a smile. As they drove towards the Whispering Woods, Luke's thoughts were a mix of anger and apprehension.
One day, those bullies will get their lot,
he muttered, more to himself than to his friends. Emma, who had been listening quietly, suddenly chimed in with a mischievous glint in her eye.
Stick them in the hole for the creature,
she suggested, half jokingly. Luke couldn't help but smile at the thought, a brief respite from his frustration. The idea of Ben facing off against the mysterious creature of the woods was oddly satisfying. But as they parked near the forest's edge, the reality of their mission set in. They were about to delve into the unknown, to uncover the truth behind a legend that had already shown its terrifying face. With cameras in hand and a mix of fear and determination in their hearts, they stepped into the Whispering Woods, unaware of the horrors that awaited them. The morning sun filtered through the dense canopy of the Whispering Woods as Emma, Luke, and Hannah set up a makeshift campsite. They chose a spot just far enough from the ancient tree to remain unseen, but close enough to keep a watchful eye on the mysterious den at its base. They positioned their cameras with zoom lenses aimed directly at the small, ominous opening in the tree. Hours passed in tense anticipation. The forest was alive with the sounds of nature, but the area around the ancient tree seemed unnaturally still, as if the creatures of the woods knew to steer clear of it. Then a deer, oblivious to the danger, meandered close to the tree. It was much too large to fit into the hole, but that didn't matter. In a blur of movement, the clawed hand shot out from the opening, grasping the deer with terrifying strength. Within seconds, the deer was pulled into the hole, devoured whole by whatever lurked within.
Did you get that?
Emma whispered, her eyes wide with shock. Luke fumbled with his camera, a mix of frustration and disbelief on his face.
No, I didn't hit record,
he admitted, regret lacing his voice. A deep, resonating growl then emanated from the tree, sending a chill down their spines. Luke, driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, suggested,
Let's shine a light in the hole, see what's in there.
Are you crazy?
Hannah responded, her voice laced with worry.
I'll stay far enough back so I'm out of reach.
Luke assured her, though his own heart raced with apprehension. He cautiously approached the hole and attempted to shine his flashlight into it. Strangely, the beam of light seemed to be swallowed by the darkness, unable to penetrate the inky blackness of the den. As he peered into the abyss, Luke could have sworn he saw two glowing red eyes watching him, sending a wave of primal fear through his body.
Luke, I've got to get back. I have class at 2.
Emma called out, startling him and breaking the tense moment. They quickly packed up their equipment, each of them silent, lost in their thoughts about the day's chilling discoveries. As they made their way out of the Whispering Woods, the sense of being watched lingered with them, a haunting reminder of the creature that now knew they had trespassed into its domain. The drive back to town was quiet, each of them processing the terrifying reality that the legend of the Whispering Woods was no mere story, but a living nightmare. Luke's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts as he drove back to his small apartment, the events at the Whispering Woods replaying over and over. The girls had gone off to their classes, leaving him alone with his turbulent thoughts. As he unlocked the door to his apartment, he was completely unprepared for what awaited him. Before he could react, Luke was blindsided. Ben and his cronies had broken into his apartment, lying in wait.
So, where's those girls? We don't like people who don't share, Lukey boy.
Ben sneered, his face twisted into a malicious grin. Without warning, Ben's fist connected with Luke's face, sending him sprawling to the floor. The other two goons joined in, kicking him mercilessly as he lay on the ground. Through the haze of pain, Luke saw Ben rummaging through his belongings, taking anything of value. Gritting his teeth, Luke came up with a desperate plan.
All right.
He gasped, trying to sound convincing.
I just came back to get some condoms. They're waiting for me in the woods. We were going to have a party, but I guess you guys can join.
Ben's eyes lit up with a vile excitement.
All right. That's what I'm talking about, Lukey boy.
With a pounding heart, Luke led the three bullies to his car and drove towards the woods, his mind racing. As they approached the ancient tree, Luke's anxiety peaked.
They should be waiting at the tree. Well, they said they'll be naked and hiding.
He lied. The three bullies rushed towards the tree, shouting out for the girls.
Where you at, girls?
Ben called out. Then one of the goons noticed the hole at the base of the tree.
Hey, there's a hole here.
In a split second, a furry arm shot out from the darkness, grabbing the goon. His screams pierced the air as his friends rushed to his aid, only to be ensnared by another grotesque hand that emerged from the hole. In moments, all three were pulled into the hole, disappearing into the darkness. Luke stood frozen, shock and disbelief coursing through him. Slowly he approached the tree, peering into the abyss. The two glowing red eyes were there, watching him, and in the eerie silence of the woods, Luke was certain he heard a voice, a whisper that seemed to come from the depths of the hole.
Thank you, Luke.
As he stumbled back from the tree, Luke's mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Fear, relief, guilt, and a strange sense of justice mixed within him. The bullies had met a fate beyond comprehension, pulled into a nightmare that was all too real. As he left the Whispering Woods, the weight of what had happened settled heavily upon him. The creature in the woods was no longer just a legend. It was a living entity that had shown gratitude in its own horrifying way. Luke lay sprawled on his couch, nursing his bruises, when a knock at the door startled him. He cautiously opened it to find Hannah and Emma standing there, concern etched on their faces.
My God, Luke. Your face. What happened?
Hannah exclaimed, her eyes widening at the sight of his injuries.
Ben and his goons.
Luke replied, his voice tinged with a mix of anger and exhaustion.
That's it. I'm calling the police.
Emma said firmly, reaching for her phone.
No, I've taken care of them.
Luke interrupted, his voice low.
I led them to the hole, and that thing, it ate them.
Emma and Hannah exchanged a glance, then burst into laughter, thinking it was a joke. But Luke's serious expression quickly wiped the smiles off their faces.
No, really?
Luke insisted.
It ate them as if they were nothing, and it thanked me.
The laughter died as the gravity of Luke's words sank in. A heavy silence fell over the room, broken only by Hannah's soft sobs. She finally spoke, her voice trembling.
Billy Lothan.
She said, tears streaming down her cheeks.
He forced me, you know. I screamed and tried to fight him, but...
She couldn't finish her sentence. overcome with emotion. Luke and Emma exchanged shocked glances. Emma, her face pale, turned to Luke.
What about you, Emma?
Luke asked gently.
What? No, I can't. I'm good.
Emma protested, but her voice lacked conviction.
Well, let's do it.
Luke said decisively, a dark resolve in his eyes. As they hatched a plan to lure Billy Lawton to the hole, Hannah wiped her tears and sent him a text, telling him she wanted to see him again and would be waiting at the tree. The message sent, the three friends sat in silence, each grappling with the moral implications of what they were about to do. But the pain and injustice they had endured seemed to overpower any doubts. They were set on a path of vengeance, one that would lead them back to the sinister depths of the Whispering Woods. Under the cover of dense foliage near the ancient tree, Luke, Emma, and Hannah lay in wait. The air was thick with tension and unspoken apprehension as they watched for Billy Lothan's arrival. As predicted, he swaggered into view, his voice carrying arrogantly through the woods.
Where you at, Hannah? So good you want some more, huh?
He approached the tree, his eyes scanning the surroundings. Spotting the hole, he bent down to peer inside, but nothing stirred in the darkness. Seemingly disappointed, Billy straightened up and began to walk away.
No, you have to pay.
Hannah whispered fiercely to herself. She couldn't let him just walk away, not after what he'd done. With a burst of courage, she stood up and ran towards the tree.
I'm here.
She called out, her voice laced with a mixture of fear and determination. Billy turned, a smug grin spreading across his face as he saw Hannah. He wrapped his arms around her.
Ready for round 2, baby?
He leered. Standing at the edge of the hole, Hannah's face was a mask of resolve. She began to kick at the edge of the hole, screaming,
Here, take him, take him!
Billy shoved her away, his expression turning from lust to confusion and anger.
You crazy?
He spat out.
Oh, well, let's do something about that.
But at that very moment, a grotesque, clawed hand shot out from the hole. With a strength and speed that defied nature, it grabbed Billy and dragged him screaming into the darkness. Hannah stood there, a mix of horror and satisfaction on her face. As she peered into the hole, the words,
Thank you, Hannah,
seemed to whisper from the depths, sending a shiver down her spine. She knew it was the creature, acknowledging her in its own terrifying way. Luke and Emma, who had watched in stunned silence, rushed to Hannah's side. They stood together, looking at the hole, a sense of eerie closure washing over them. The monster in the Whispering Woods had become their unwitting avenger, a dark guardian that exacted the justice they felt the world had denied them. As the trio prepared to leave the Whispering Woods, a sudden change overcame Emma. She turned towards the ancient tree with a look of determination and fear mixed in her eyes.
I'm not having this. We can't do this anymore.
She declared resolutely. Before Luke or Hannah could react, Emma sprinted back to the car, grabbed a spade, and began to furiously dig around the edges of the hole. Luke rushed after her, grabbing her arm in an attempt to stop her.
Stop, Emma. What if it gets out?
But Emma was beyond reasoning. She swung the spade with a frantic energy, the hole growing larger and more unstable with each strike. Hannah joined Luke, trying to pull Emma away.
Think, Em. What if it gets out and goes into town? It's just eaten a deer and 4 people. How much could it eat? The whole town?
Her words finally penetrated Emma's frenzied state, and she halted, the reality of the situation crashing down on her. Tears streamed down her face as the gravity of what they had unleashed hit her. Luke and Hannah embraced her, offering silent support. The 3 friends slowly walked back to the car, each lost in their own thoughts, the weight of their actions heavy on their hearts. They swore to each other to never return to this accursed place, to try and forget the horrors they had witnessed and been a part of. As they drove away, the creature in the Whispering Woods made its move. With the last pieces of dirt removed by Emma's desperate digging, it pushed itself out of its ancient prison. Freed from the sacred earth that had bound it for centuries, it emerged into the woods, a dark silhouette against the fading light. It looked up to the sky and let out an eerie, triumphant howl. In the car, a chill ran down Emma's spine as she heard a voice in her head, clear and haunting.
And thank you most of all, Emma.
The words echoed in her mind, a chilling reminder of the dark pact they had unwittingly made with the creature of the woods. As they left the Whispering Woods behind, the friends knew their lives would never be the same. They had faced their demons, but in doing so, they had unleashed something far more terrifying into the world. The end of their ordeal marked the beginning of a new, darker chapter for the town of Elmswood.
And if you're still looking to fulfill your thirst for more horror, don't forget to check out this next video, unless of course you're frozen with fear already.